Technologies presents Weld Wednesday with AWS. Brought to you by the American Welding Society. And now your host, Jason Becker.
All right, Daryl, welcome back to Weld Wednesdays with AWS.
Well, thank you for having me back.
Yeah, I think this is what, your third time?
It is my third time.
Yeah, you're a wealth of knowledge, man. I wanted to bring you out tonight because I want to talk about some of the certifications that are available through the AWS, because a lot of folks get into welding and they find out they either don't love it or it's too hard on their body or they want to take their next step in their career. And I want people to know that there's additional options that are out there in the welding industry that doesn't require you to be under a hood all day.
Yeah, for sure.
So, some of them, starting off with like, what do you think the most, or probably the best certifications for somebody to work towards or acquire once, they've got roughly 5 to 7 years worth of work experience in the industry?
Well, obviously I'm going to say the CWI, but I'm biased.
A little bit. Have you done anything with
the CW?
Have you done anything with the CWS, the Certified Welding Supervisor?
No, but I'm actually working on getting two of our guys in our shop to go through that, because the stuff that I've heard from it, they incorporate some lean, and absolutely getting my company to look at machines, from Lincoln that will do all the data capturing and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah, it's highly beneficial to the employer, and I think a lot of people overlook that because they're like, "Oh, just weld it." But like Charlie Cross and Padraig Bean were saying, you get the moron theory. Okay, we need a 3/16 weld. The welder's going to put 5/16 on there. Okay, it doesn't seem like much, but over the course of however many linear feet, you're putting in so much more weld wire than you actually need, and somebody's paying for that.
Well, you've seen the fillet weld one I do, right? Have I ever showed you that one?
I'm not sure. I mean, you showed me a bunch of stuff with a fillet weld.
Let me just have a second here. So I love to show this one because, Charlie Cross and them, those guys are engineers, and off the top of their head, they can do all the math, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so you have a fillet weld, and it's supposed to be, I don't know if we can get that to focus. Let's say it's supposed to be 1/8 of an inch. And, we measure that right here, right? The leg length. But let's say that was
actual throat to the root to the toe.
It's the leg length, not the throat.
Yeah.
Okay. But let's say that we were supposed to make it 1/8, but we actually made it 1/4. Right. So now we're out here at 1/4. How much over welding have we done?
Twice the size.
It's twice the size.
Leg length is twice the size, but if you figure out the hypotenuse and volume of that weld, it's probably almost triple.
What if I just did that?
Yeah, you're putting in triple the amount of weld in there.
4 times the amount of weld. It's 300% over welded.
Yeah.
So if this is what I do just so welders can see it, but you draw that in, and then you just draw that one into a square and touch that second line, and you can see those are all equal sized triangles inside there. That's 400% over welded. Well, 300% over welded.
Yeah, I've never looked at it like that. But I mean that's the benefit of getting that type of endorsement going through those classes. It's heavily based in math from what I understand. I want to look more into it because I think that's one of the next, I've been saying this for a couple of years once I find the time, but I think that's one of the next credentials that I want to go after is the CWS. I know Nate Bowman has his. He speaks very highly of it. That what's the book? The Quality and Productivity Improvement Manual from Jack Barkov.
Right.
I think that's what that CWS endorsement is based off of. But I think that'd be a good one to have, just especially for the line of work that I'm in. When I go in and do consulting with companies and try to help expedite, some of their processes, improve some of their procedures, do a little bit of training with the welders. I mean, I think that would be a great endorsement to have to get in there to work with manufacturers and, erectors and all that stuff. I mean, there's a lot to it. Do you know what the requirements are on that? Do you have to take, is it still 3 parts? You have to take part A, which is your general knowledge, and then take the CWS exam?
That one I'm not sure about because I haven't really looked into it.
I got to
But
dig into that one.
yeah,
And
um,
I think AWS is coming out with a online lean management program.
I've seen that. I've seen where they're coming out with it.
Yeah, I think we're talking a little bit about that at FabTech. So that's, I mean, that's good. A lot of people don't understand, the time and value of lean manufacturing, what that can do for a shop, and they're like, "Oh, that's not going to work in my shop because I do, custom work, or I don't do a high volume. Everything's kind of like, or I don't do low mix high volume. It's more of
Right.
low mix high volume. So every part's different, but you can still run a lean facility and incorporate a lot of um, those techniques and tactics and stuff in your own place to make things more efficient."
And I think that's kind of the same thing with those cobots. A lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to buy a cobot, programming and everything's going to take forever. And they're so fast and they are, you can, because it's point to point programming and not, sitting there doing this all
With the
day,
old
you can
teach
do
pendant,
one
yeah.
of, with that teach pendant, you can do one ofs pretty quick. And especially now when you don't have the, just welder students lined up for jobs, we're still struggling in the whole employment section.
Yeah, I know Corey Mays out of Texas. I talked to him at the automation conference last year, and he incorporated cobots like way before. He was like an early adopter, and they just found so many different uses for it. And so that
Right.
actually freed up some more of his technical workers to go work on some more of the complex stuff, and then take somebody that maybe, getting out of school and understands how to put in a good weld, what a good weld looks like, how to avoid certain discontinuities, swap out the wire, check for bad contact tips, all that stuff,
Oh
and
yeah.
put them on a cobot and keep them productive and working.
Run two or three cobots.
Exactly. And then they're super portable, so you can move them around the shop too.
Right. They're on like a workbench. It's a rolling workbench. It's super cool.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. I think Lincoln's. I think it's on a strong hand table,
Yep.
like their
Yep.
little Rhino cart. A
Oh
couple of
yeah.
them are using those fixture tables. But the cool thing is, you can actually leave it on that fixture table and roll it up next to somebody else's workbench. And if it's within reach of that arm, you can program it to,
You
you
can,
just lock it in and boom, turn it on, let it rip.
hey, weld from here to here and run this, I guess they still call it a procedure, but 200 amps, 25 volts, and boom.
Yeah. No, they're pretty cool setups. I'd love to
Oh
get one
yeah.
for the school. I think that might be in the, well, not so near future, but that's something I'd like to add into, because everybody keeps asking me, "Do you teach robotics?" No, not in a short term
Yeah.
training
And
class,
then
but
conventional robot, it's that takes some doing.
yeah, that takes a lot more. That's when you're using the pendants and all that and programming.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really, the funny thing was, when we got the robot at the school that I was teaching at prior, I was like, why? I got frustrated with the teach pendant, and I was like, why can't I just grab the head and move it to where I want? And then, sure enough, 3 years later, they come out with a cobot, and that's exactly how you teach that thing how to weld. You push a button,
Right.
you drag it over where it's supposed to be. You set weld point one, you drag it over here, and you say, okay, that's set point two or weld point two. Boom, stop, done.
That's right. And getting back to your question, the welding supervisor, I believe they talk a lot, teach a lot about if you got bulk gas and how to look for and find gas leaks and not spending a fortune on leaking gas to the atmosphere. So it can more than pay for the class and the cert can more than pay for itself over time, right? Because you can do things a lot more efficiently. If in that example, if you put twice the amount of weld in, it's probably or four times the amount of weld. So if that 1/8 weld was supposed to take $10 for you to make, then you say, okay, well, logically you say 40, but I would say maybe 50 or 60 because the more you're welding, every time that hood comes up and that blue light ain't on, you ain't making money, right? So you flip the hood up, you go to the bathroom, and you get talking to your friends, and next thing you know that cost has gone out there.
Yeah, I think out of the average day, you spend actually 20% of your time is hood time.
That's right.
I mean, unless
And
you're
it
in a high
depends if you're in the
production.
shop.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody's feeding you
You get
parts,
30-40%. But yeah,
yeah,
and that's right. If they're feeding you, and if you've got a good you got a good material handler that's got the parts right there for you, you don't have to go get them. And one of the things they did early on, um, as a consultant back a couple jobs ago, coming out of the automotive industry, was I would put 3 tanks on a column because we weren't using bulk gas at the time, but I put three tanks on a column where there's 2 welding machines, and then I welded a shelf onto the column, and I painted it hot neon pink, right? And I put 4-inch collars that I cut out of PVC that are an inch tall, and half of them were neon pink and half of them were green. So you got three bottles, 2 machines, and obviously you're only going to use 2 bottles at a time. But if your bottle runs out, you just switch over. So you're not running to get another bottle, right? And you're the welder. You're making, back then it was making $25 an hour. Now you're talking about closer to 30, right? So you swap your gas over, you put that ring on hot pink, and your $15 an hour material handler comes over and swaps it out for you. And so we were all using the same wire. So I painted a 1 foot square on the column, had a shelf, and we bungeed a box of wire on there. So when you ran out, you grab that box. That bright pink was wide open, and if you're using different kinds of wires, I put a little plastic sleeve on there with business cards and say, "Hey, bring me some ER70S6 or E71T1." So the material handler would grab that card, run and grab whatever it is, come back, put it back, and bungee it back into place. So it's lean manufacturing, Six Sigma. You know, applying it to the welding industry is a lot different than in the automotive where you're making hundreds of thousands of parts a day, right? So, but thinking outside of the box and doing things to keep that blue light on as much as possible.
yeah, arc
You
on
know,
time. I mean, I mean, if you're a welding
but
shop, that's what's making you the money.
that what makes you. That's right. Everything else is non-value added. You're not getting paid for it.
Yeah. And then just like moving things closer to the workspace, having things organized. I remember when I got into, because like when I was at the other school, they hired me to be a welding instructor. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go in and teach welding. Well, it was part of an advanced manufacturing program. Well, I had no idea. Like, I'd never worked in a manufacturing environment. Like, I've worked in lean-tos, I've worked in sheds and, like shops and all that stuff, but it's never been like a manufacturing environment. A lot of custom fab,
Right.
structural steel, the erection portion. Um, so I got in there and they're all talking about, Six Sigma and black belts. And I'm like, we're going to start doing jujitsu in here or what? But it's a whole process, like
It
the
is.
5S's or whatever, like sort, shine. And then there's 3 other things that start with an S. Like, that tells you how much I caught on to it. But I mean,
Well,
it was
those
a
are
very
actually
efficient system.
Japanese names first. They kind of had to adapt American versions of it. But, well, yeah, I know all about all that.
Yeah, there's like Kaizen and Muda and all kinds of, like trash
So
and
Muda's
waste and all
waste.
that. Yeah,
Oh,
Muda's the
yeah.
waste,
Yeah.
Kaizen. Then you got Kanbans for all your bins.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, all that stuff rolls right into the
FIFO,
certified,
first in, first out.
the
Oh,
Certified
yeah.
Welding Supervisor program. So I think that's a good logical step for somebody that's been in the industry for quite a while to get into that, especially in a supervisory role. I mean, like the name entails. But I mean, you can save your company a lot of money, and I think a lot of companies undervalue it because they just they don't understand what it is. They don't know enough about it. So they're like, okay, we don't need that. We're not worried about it. We need an
Old
inspector though.
paradigms. We never needed it before, right?
Yeah, we've been doing it like this for 20 years. Well, I mean, that's why you're constantly in the red there, bud.
That's right.
But yeah, in addition to that, I mean, I'm sure everybody's aware of the Certified Welding Inspector's certification. I mean, that's to this day. I mean, I put an episode out back in January this year. Everything you need to know about taking the CWI exam, and I still get questions at least once a week. Hey, man, I'm thinking about taking my CWI. What do I need to do? So now the cool thing is I'm like, hey, go listen to this episode. Boom, there's everything. And I've got all the hyperlinks listed out, for classes and books and like all the resources you need. But I think that was probably one of the best things that I've ever done for my career. And the cool thing is, I didn't have to take my hood off to do it. Like I came from a background of welding, and I decided to take that, next step in my career, get my certified welding inspector's endorsement. Now I can go out there and inspect welds. I can qualify welders. I mean, we'll get to that other part here shortly, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can do with the certified welding inspector's endorsement. And I think that's a logical step for a lot of people that they've got, again, they meet that criteria, and maybe necessarily they don't want to be under the hood, or they want to take that next step in their career.
And I saw an article, I think might have been Gary Pace, but I saw somebody somewhere saying that, hey, 90% of what you need is in the book. That if you went to a tech college or you went to high school and you got a book, Modern Welding, 90% of what you need is in there, right? And it's crazy because we don't really push that. But I would say this: knowing the part A stuff, part B and C, but mostly part A, if you actually know that material, you'd be a 10-time better welder.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It'll make you a much better welder.
I think that's one of the things that helped me out on the exam. When I went to go sit and take the class, we were going through some of the mock questions for part A, and I was like, oh, this is great. This is what I'm teaching in my class.
That's
so,
right.
I mean, it was super easy, because I taught welding symbols. I taught the differences in polarity, the different welding processes, inspection techniques. This is what VT looks like. This is what PT looks like. This is what, RT is, So, I mean, that helped me out quite a bit.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, and especially what's good coupled with that is the CWE program, the Certified Welding Educator program, which, and I think that should be almost a bare minimum requirement if you're going to be a welding educator. I mean, it makes sense because it's the Certified Welding Educator's endorsement or the certification, but it's going to make you a better welding educator. A lot of the stuff that I learned during that seminar, I was able to take back there and just regurgitate it to my students, off the sample books and questions and stuff. I was like, cool, I can start populating my own tests from, some of the practice
correct
exams.
me if I'm wrong, but you don't really need to even take the exam. If you have the CWI, it's basically your institution writes that, hey, yes, he's a educator, and is that pretty much it, or do you still have to take a test?
No, you still have to take a test. So the difference between CWI and the CWE is with the CWE, you only take parts A and B, and you need a current certified welder endorsement.
Gotcha.
So that was one of the things I had. I was like, man, I haven't taken a welding test since I got into education because I haven't needed to, and I haven't needed to maintain my continuity. So I had to go out and get a welding cert real quick. And then luckily I know enough CWIs in the area. They were able to help me out with that. So I got my certified welder credential, and then I applied for that. And I was like, well, it just makes sense. As a welding educator, if you're going to take if you're going to sit for the CWI exam, pay that additional fee and just, get that extra endorsement added on to, your last name there, so it's CWI, CWE, because that's really the only difference. I was like, I'm already taking A, B, and C. If all I need to do is just get a welding certification, boom, done. But I mean, that'd be a good way to vet potential welding instructors that are coming into your program is, they already have the Certified Welding Educator endorsement. So that means that they're certifiable, when it comes to the practical application of welding, and they've passed enough, background knowledge to be able to teach this information, or, they have that background information. I remember, our buddy there, he shall remain nameless out there. We sit on his advisory board. He was looking for instructors in his area, and one of the major questions was he was asking,
County, would it?
I'm not sure what county, but
I don't know what county that is.
It's a 2-hour drive from my house. But he was asking potential instructors, are you familiar with either D11 or ASME Section 9? And half of them didn't know what those codes and specs were. That's dangerous if you're going to get in there and teach students how to weld to a code if you've never heard of the code.
Oh yeah,
that blows my mind. But if you had that
I welded with Dad in the garage.
Yeah, because if you think about it, most administrators don't know what it takes to teach welding. So you could
if they did, instructors would get paid a hell of a lot more.
Oh, that's true. That is true. But you could go in there and you could. I mean, I went for my panel interview. You know, I had 5 other educators in the room. I could tell none of them knew anything about welding. And they walked in there and asked me to, tell them about welding, do a 5-minute teach back and this, that, and the other thing. I could have told them anything under the sun because they knew absolutely nothing about welding. That'd be like, me sitting in interviewing the HVAC, instructor. I don't know anything
Yeah,
about HVAC other than I've got a guy's number on my phone when mine's not blowing cold air, right?
that's
That's
right.
the extent of my HVAC. That and keep it clean and swap out the filters. But I mean, that would give you some sort of, that'd give you credibility when you're walking through the door if you've got
Oh,
that
for sure.
endorsement. And then
And
administrators could say, "Oh, cool, we can rule these other candidates out because this one's already vetted. Essentially, they've done our job for us."
right, and I know you've been a lot on the private side of education. I deal again with our buddy who we won't name, I guess, but BL. But on the public side, the in the state of Florida, um, they get a kickback for each cert. So if you go to tech school, technical college, or even high school, um, through the DOE, Florida DOE, and it doesn't even have to be welding, but you have to have an industry cert, right? So whether you're doing cars or plumbing or whatever, and for welding, it's AWS. So AWS got them hooked in, and I don't think it's a bad thing, but they make them go through an ATF, right? And I know you got your ATF, and that's not a simple process, right?
No, it's
And
not.
you really need to know what you're doing. But now, this QC47, I know I sent you a copy because it's free now on AWS through the bookstore. But um, supposedly, end of the year, first part of next year, Q4 this year, Q1 next year, they're looking at switching over. So it's going to go from QC4 and QC7 to QC47. And now, instead of just being a CWI, you also have to have your WPQ1 endorsement in order to qualify students, right? And with that, if you taught them, you can't qualify them for 6 months since you taught them.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's listed in
So
QC7 already.
right. So now there's an out. You have an independent qualifier. So if you have a CWI that also has their WPQ1, you can get them in your program. They can come in and test your students, on that day. If you're an ATF and you're still going to maintain um, the materials and the testing and all that stuff at your facility or your mobile lab, right? So, and I think we'll touch on it later because I want to really talk about endorsements in lieu of certifications, right?
Hmm.
Because as a CWI, now we talked about Certified Welding Supervisor, um, Educator. As a CWI, for one, and I know we talk about this all the time. You know, some companies will say, "Hey, we need a CWI," right? So back up. We have a ton of welding companies that don't know anything about the codes. Nothing. They don't do code work, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden they'll get a job that requires, oh, you got to weld it to D11 or API or ASME, and then they're like, well, what do we do, right? They're clueless about the codes. They don't know how they work. They don't know about qualification and certification of welders. They don't know about how to qualify their procedures. Um, they don't know about continuity for welders. So there's just a ton of things that they have to learn. And fortunately for people like me who, on my consulting side, that's a lot of money, and there's a lot of people that need those services, right? So at the end of the day, those people, as they start breaking into um, this this code world, they end up saying, "Hey, Johnny, you're my best welder. I'm going to send you to CWI school." They foolishly send them to a 1 week seminar and think they're going to pass, and that's really why we have such a high failure rate the first time, because as well as I do, it takes a minimum of 6 months and up to 2 years to study that material. You're not gonna go to a 1 week class and have high expectations to pass. I
Yeah,
mean, you might
especially
have
if
the
you've never
expectations.
Yeah, especially if you've never worked out of a code book. And like I used to
That's
proctor a lot of
right.
those exams, so I would meet a lot of those guys. Even when I sat through as a section rep, I mean, the number of people that were in that room that were like, "Oh, my company sent me."
Yeah.
Well,
Oh
okay,
yeah.
what did you do prior to this? Oh, I was working out in the field. Or okay, so they really didn't have the background knowledge or understand what they were getting ready to go through.
Yeah.
That was the
Oh yeah.
hardest test I've ever taken in my life.
Oh,
And
me too. And I've
I mean,
taken, I've got NDT, I've got ultrasonics. I got some pretty hard tests, and the CWI was by far the hardest.
there's a lot to it. So if you just walk in and you're like, okay, I meet the bare minimum requirements. I got my 5 years worth of work experience. I got my, I got my letters here. I got my work history. I got my visual acuity done. I've checked all the boxes. I'm ready to go take this test. If
Yep.
you've never sat down and looked through that code book or glanced and seen what was in there, or, you know, understand how to read welding symbols, go through standard terms and definitions. I know they're updating A 2.4 and A 3.0. I think those books are coming out shortly if they haven't already started trickling out. But if you've never cracked open those books or had access to them or looked through them, don't go signing up for the CWI exam just yet. Sit down,
Yeah, because
study, do some review.
all those terms you learned as a welder are probably not
Bad.
correct.
Those are bad words. Those are bad words now. And I know Dr. Scott Helzer corrected me like really quick.
All the
So
time.
so
Oh
when you're
yeah.
stick welding, he's like, never heard of it. I was like, shielded metal arc welding. Okay. So
SMAW, baby.
yep, you gotta learn how to speak as an inspector, and that's part of it. So if you walk in there and you got a bunch of slang and you've never really used standard terms and definitions, you're not going to know what some of that stuff on the exam means. You're not going to understand the questions that they're asking you.
And honestly, you need to know the welder side of it, because a
Yep,
lot of times you're between the engineer and the
and the
welder,
welder.
right?
Yep,
You're the
you're almost an
interpreter.
interpreter. Yeah, and there's a
So
big calling for that. To be able to speak, to the engineer and then tell the welder
engineers.
what they need. And yeah, engineers, you got to be able to speak to both parties there. And I mean that's helped me out quite a bit. Just having that endorsement and understanding, okay, this is how, if I go in there and talk to the welders, these are the words that I'm going to use. If I go talk to the engineer or other inspectors, these are the words that I'm going to use. So, I mean,
Right.
it's good to know all that, but it's definitely a hard exam. And like you were saying, study 6 months to a year before signing up. If they just pull you off the shop floor one day and say, hey, you're going to CWI seminar next week, good luck, man. Godspeed. If you've never looked through any of those code books or worked out of them.
How many times have you heard somebody, yeah, I failed it again, like on their third or fourth time?
Yeah.
And it's not because they're not smart people. It's that tough of a test.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult, and you gotta, like I said, when I put out that episode, I got to sit in for that free seminar as a section rep, which I think that was probably the most beneficial thing I could have ever done. So then I had an idea of what to study, what books to have, which ones to leaf through, how to tab my code book. I mean, that was a good. I mean, that was definitely a step in the right direction. So that when I went to go sit for that exam, I had a really good idea of what to expect because I've already taken a pretest.
Right.
Not that I knew what the answers were going to be, but I know kind of how that test is structured: part A, part B, part C. Um, and now they've separated it to, you take part B on that Saturday following exam, and then you've got to take part A and C at a Prometrics testing center. So
So
understanding what's going to be
they're
required for the
working
testing.
hard on getting part B at Prometrics too.
Really?
Yes.
That's going to be a rough one.
So when you sign up, when you pay your money and everything, and you pick your testing site, they're going to have to send that kit
Ahead
to
of
that
time.
testing site.
Yeah, prior
And
to you
they're
showing up.
working hard on trying to make that work, and it's going to be to their benefit, because even now that's the one test that really holds you up, because they know, on your part A and your part C, that once you hit that enter button, you preliminarily pass or you preliminary didn't, right?
Yeah, that was
And
that was a great thing when I went to take my WPQ1 is by the time I got to my car, I was like, I'm just going to
You already
sit
had
here
that
and just
email?
relax. I was like, I'm just going to check some emails before I get out here on the road. And I was like, I already got an email from Prometrics. Congratulations. You know, it's like preliminary. It doesn't give you a score, but it tells you pass or fail. And
Right.
then AWS sends you your actual
The
results.
letter later on, yeah. And you
Yeah.
can see where you did really good and where you didn't. Although you still don't understand it because it just, hey, this section,
Mhm.
right? You did. But but yeah, so getting back on the endorsements real quick, I'm a big fan. I used to not be, and I will tell anybody when we talk about taking your CWI, people are like, oh, I want to take it on 1104. It's the thinnest book. Well, when you take all the annexes and all the commentary, which is fantastic, by the way, and the D11, if you don't understand something, see if there's some commentary about it because it'll help you understand why they did it,
Mhm.
right? But at the end of the day, when you take all of it away and you take the metric sections out, they're about the same size, right? But I would tell anybody, hey, if your company's doing Section 8 work, take it on ASME, right? You already have the code. You should have the code if you're doing
Should.
ASME work, right? If
Should.
you're doing 1104 work, take it on 1104. If you're doing D11 work, take it on D11. At the end of the day, I do feel, in my experiences, if you can get through one code, you can muddle your way through any of the codes, right? Because they're all kind of set up the same way. They got a design section, they have an inspection section, they have a qualification section. So they all kind of the same, right? So you should be able to dig through it. And I agree with that to the most part. But why would you go buy a code book that you don't need, that you're not using, right? So take it on the code that you're doing. You know, and then you're just really showing proficiency there.
Yeah.
Do I think that, I work in ASME a lot. Do I think that I need ASME endorsement? No, I don't. But I will say I would encourage every CWI to go look at the WPQ1, and if you're serious, the WPQ2. And I'm telling you what, that WPQ2 was not an easy test. It wasn't as hard as the CWI, but it wasn't easy. Um, but if you're going to be working with procedures and um, personnel, those are the two that I'll tell you to get. Plus, it's from there. It's only like $600 to recertify it 9 years. It's super cheap, right? And you don't have to pay to renew those. Like if you do the certified radiographer, you do, I think the NDT ones you do. But for the bulk of them, you don't have to pay to recertify. So if you've got, let's see here, if you've got uh, PT, MT, UT, VT, every 5 years, you got to pay to recertify all those, right? Every 3 years, 3 and 6 years, you pay to renew your CWI. And then at your 9 year, you pay to recertify. And if you don't meet the requirements for PDHs or you don't have endorsements, you got to pay a lot of money to do an 80-hour class or take the Part B, which nobody wants to do that, right? Unless you're just a glutton for punishment, or you're really teaching it and you want to learn, hey, what's going on, and did I miss something, and you want to stay up to date, right? But the average CWI certainly doesn't want to take that again.
No.
So I would highly encourage endorsements, right? And now, I went back. I'm 9 years now from when I took my senior, and that was a very interesting test. Part A, Part B. The list of books. It's open book test. The list of books stack up about 4 foot tall, and you don't know what to bring and what not to bring, right? So nowadays, they're moving to. They keep announcing the endorsements, and I've seen it. So it's the WPQ1, WPQ2, the QA endorsement, and I just took the beta test on this, which is the NDEC, non-destructive examiner qualifier. So I just took like I said, I took a beta test on that 2 weeks ago. So, and I've got my scores for it, but they're looking at it's a beta test. So they look at it and say, hey, these questions are good. These aren't. They don't tell you right away on a beta test. And that's kind of one of the things that if you're lucky enough to take one of those beta tests, that they kind of sharpen and they ask you questions. Hey, what did you think about this? Were there any goofy questions, whatnot? So being a level 3 NDT, like I scored really high on that stuff, but there's a lot of questions about the programs, and it's out of the quality type program, and it's out of ISO. So, and I'm just now kind of learning more about ASNT. Like they don't do their central certification program anymore. They're going to the 9712, which is the ISO version, so that if you don't do the under ASNT, you have the NDT level 3, and then you got the 9712 level 3. I guess they got level 2s too, but the 9712, they take a practical and a specific that the NDT doesn't take, and it's very well rounded. So that way, the 9712 is recognized overseas in Europe and everything else. So it's the same standards that the Europeans do.
Oh, gotcha.
So we're not pigeonholed, and I think AWS is really considering and looking hard on making their CWI program at least have like ASNT did, have a portion of it that's going to be recognized worldwide. So
yeah, that'd be good.
So that's going to. So endorsements, like I said, they're about half the price of the CWI in most cases. Plus, you don't have to keep paying for them, other than like I said, the X-ray and the NDT ones for the most part.
And that's why
it gets you cheap. It gets you $500-$600 at your research. It's like renewing if you have done that.
Yeah, and that's the major reason. So when they came out with the WPQ1, I went ahead and signed up for that class and took it because we were in the process of becoming an ATF, and that I knew QC4 and QC7 were going to be combined into QC47 at some point. And when I started digging into it, it said it satisfies the requirements of your 9-year cert. So I was like, "Oh, that's perfect." But I mean,
who was your instructor?
Some guy out in Arizona. I can't remember his name. We did it virtual via Zoom.
Gotcha.
I met like two days a week. I think we met like Tuesdays and Thursdays or something like that for like 2 to 3 hours for 4 weeks. And then I went and sat and took the exam at the Prometrics. But I knew I wanted to take that one because it made sense for me to get it. Like you were saying, if you're gonna go take the CWI exam, if you work in D11, take that route. If you work in API, go that route. Don't flip flop back and forth on a code book you're never going to work with. Test in the one that you're going to be working to. But it was the same thing. It was relevant to what I was going to be doing because I running an ATF, I need to be able to certify welders. So I was like, it makes sense for that. Plus, it's going to satisfy the requirements of my 9-year, which I really wasn't concerned with because I do so many different seminars and conferences. I'm constantly picking up PDHs. Plus, you got AWS online, so I can kind of work at my own pace because I know you got to have 40 your first 6 years and then 40 the last 3 years, right? For a total of 80.
Yeah,
I think the math kind of works out like that.
It might have been 20, but in your last 3.
But I was like, even though I take enough seminars and stuff and, go to all these different things and AWS section meetings, you can get another good place to pick up PDHs. It's like, this is kind of like a surefire way to make sure, I don't have to submit a bunch of paperwork and track down a bunch of certificates and, scan them all and send them to AWS and find out that I'm at, 79 hours or something. Like, I do not want to take that exam ever again. But
so I just 9-yeared. I sent them 270 PDHs. I'm like, here, reject whatever you want.
Overachiever.
Right? and then also the WPQ2 endorsement. And
that's another good one.
Yeah, I think, especially now that, like I said, I'm 56. I plan on staying with Central until I'm 62, right? I'm not going to retire, but I have a 20-year-old now. My youngest is 20. And last year I lost that $6,000 tax write-off.
Ooh.
So I started my own consulting companies, buying printers and stuff and writing it up. And I can't seem to not make no money, right? I'm getting called all the time. And I have to be careful because, conflict of interest. So I work with companies that they're not competitors in our space,
Mhm.
but you know, I review tons, and I'm QC, right? So I work for the contractor, right? But the QA guys, actually, Andy, I just true story. Like this week, um, Andy rejected a WPS, right? And I'm kind of fourth party in this thing because who he rejected it for, they used some ironworkers. Ironworkers got with me, and they're like, "Hey, what do we need to do here?" And I have some really great personal relationships, so I don't charge these guys anything. But um, so I wrote them a WPS that was compliant, and and sent it out. So and then I texted Andy. I said, "Hey, Andy, just by the way, you know, um, I I know this is going on. I don't know if you know I'm in this or not, but here, I sent it back to them. So you should be getting a compliant one. If you have any questions, call me. We'll straighten it out, right? So, um, but yeah, I think having the procedure one is going to be super beneficial to anybody that writes procedures. And let me ask you this: so you took the WPQ one. What do you think of the B21 spec?
I like it. I think it's a very versatile code book that I never knew existed prior to taking that exam, or spec book, I should
Exactly.
say.
Spec. So
Yeah, spec book. So because I do a lot of stuff for, because I'm over here in Central Florida, I develop procedures. A lot of those are based off B21 or to be compliant with D13. So
right,
I can use B21 in conjunction because it blows my mind how restrictive D1.3 is compared to D11. It's like
right.
you want to weld a fillet weld? Okay, that's all you're certified to do. You want to weld
Boom,
groove weld? You can only
boom.
weld groove welds. That's it.
And
Whereas
only
with
that one groove out, yeah.
it's just that one. And with D11, it's like, oh, if you do a groove weld, you get fillets and grooves, you get pipe 24-inch diameter and larger. You get all this stuff. But D13 is very restrictive. So I can find a lot of stuff in B21 that's going to help me develop a procedure to be D13 compliant.
And so under B21, now you got these M numbers, right? And if you qualify on A36 M1 material, M1's mild steel.
Mhm.
Now you can weld M1 through M15E, which by the way is 9 chrome. Uh, the M8s are stainless, austenitic stainlesses. Um, M34 and M41 to M49. So just by taking that one test, you're qualified to weld all that. That's your range of qualification.
It's kind of like ASME.
It's ASME Section 9 light.
Yeah.
And I say that tongue in cheek, but I mean, there's a couple things different. Like under ASME Section 9, you qualify half inch, it gets you unlimited.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for whatever reason, B21 says, well, half inch is too small, 1 inch is, I guess, too big out of D11, so we'll go 3/4. So 3/4 gets you unlimited, right? Which is kind of goofy, but you know, and AWS B21 says, hey, if there's not an M number, but there is a P number out of ASME, it's the same M number. So you get tons and tons and tons of materials. There's like 174 materials out of D11 that you get when you test on D1. There's like 1,000, 1,700, materials that you get.
Well, 70%
So
of B21 is all the materials.
all the materials.
I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is just tables of materials. I mean, there's a couple chapters up front when it talks about
right.
qualifying welders and stuff, but I was like, the rest of it's just a book of materials.
It is, and just like ASME, if you do a P1 to P1, basically any mild steel to any mild steel, doesn't matter, right? You can't weld P1 to P8 unless you test that,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the other nice thing is that like under D11, you test in the positions you're going to use in welding, right? So you got to test, 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, whatever. ASME has the mentality that is the weld capable of meeting the mechanical properties, yes or no, right? So is this procedure with this range of amps and volts, is it going to meet it? And then they rely on the welder to be able to meet that procedure for whatever position.
Mhm.
And AWS doesn't do that. So one of the cool things about being on the committees, and especially on the D committee, I'm only an applicant, but you get to see like the full money is, there was a hard push, and a lot of people worked really hard to get B21 to be the fourth way that you can qualify welders and procedures. And there's a couple holdouts that they just won't let it go yet. I expect fully the 2030 code to be B21 to be the fourth way.
Okay.
But I do love the B21 code, and anybody that's going to be taking those endorsements, you're going to be heavily introduced to B21 if you're not already.
Yeah, and I think I've got like 3 copies now because I ordered some. I got one through the school, and then I had another one laying around. Like I had the code book, and I
Yeah.
didn't even know, or the spec book. I didn't even know I had it because I never had to refer to it. I was like, oh yeah, I had like 3 or 4 of them laying around. So now I got one at the, or I got 2 of them at the office, and then 2 of them here in the studio.
And I'll say this. I mean, I don't know who your instructor was. We went out to Arizona, I believe. We went out to the Ironworker Hall out there, and Rick Soria was the instructor. He's kind of he's the main instructor for the WPQ1. There's other guys that teach it. Rick is phenomenal. And then Paul Cameron is the main instructor for WPQ2. I've never met Paul. Of course, on the forums, he's one of my heroes by far. And there's a lot of people that I consider web mentors, right? Al Moore and the guy you recently had on, welder Brent.
Oh yeah, Brent Bowling.
Brent he's a sharp dude. And I've had the pleasure, I was out in Arizona. I had the pleasure to meet him at his house and see his shop and talk to him at his house. He is a super dude, super good dude. I met Al when he was actually got his CWI Lifetime Achievement Award. There's a funny story there with his suit and everything. But at the end of the day, I mean, people that have just been my icons and I've learned from are just outstanding, and I'd say something on the net, and he would back channel me, email me directly and say, hey, did you think about this? Did you think about that? Where I wasn't wrong, but I wasn't fully right, and that's one of the things about being legalese, because there's always an exception to everything you say, right?
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so I'd put that out there. If you're going to take the in-person, I'm not saying anybody else is bad at it. I'm just saying I think a couple of the best, because that's what they do for a living. I'd look those guys up. Rick Soria was outstanding. And then, like I said, I know Paul teaches the WPQ2, and I wish I'd gone to the seminar. I just kind of took it raw because, again, when I took that seminar, it was beta. And yeah, so I go into those betas pretty raw. I don't even think they have the seminars even
Up and
ready.
going. Yeah, no, not
Yeah.
until they get the
So,
finalized.
but yeah, so you get those two, the NDEC. They got one up and coming, which I'm on the committee for that too, which is the operators inspector. So you're familiar with the authorized inspector, right? Or a little bit. So yeah, you're an iron worker.
Oh, the company's authorized inspector.
No. So when you work in ASME, if you've got an S stamp or a PP stamp or a U stamp, so U stamp's pressure vessels, right? PP is pressure piping, S is boiler. When you're working under those stamps and those programs, you have to have an authorized inspector that represents the jurisdiction. So if you're working somewhere, most of the time the authorized inspector is going to represent the jurisdiction, and they'll speak for that state's boiler inspector, right? Or pressure vessel inspector. At the end of the day, they have their commission through the NBIC, and they get a commission. There's couple different ones they can get, but they don't work for you. You have to actually hire them as your authorized inspection agency. So they don't, you pay them and come and do it, but they don't work for you, and they're totally independent. But they only work within the jurisdiction of the code. And like on boilers, you have boiler proper, and then you have boiler external. And once you get outside of the jurisdiction, it becomes the owner's responsibility to do the inspections. And the ASME codes have said that for decades, right? But there's never been and it basically it's up to the owner to decide how they do it, right? Or what the qualifications are. And now ASME is teaming up with AWS for an owner's inspector. So that's going to be another endorsement. And you need to know like different types of flanges and piping and some stuff. But it's going to be the equivalent of the AI, but on the owner's side. So that's an endorsement that's coming up, and that's really been exciting. I mean, you can't really talk too much outside of the committees about what's going on, but I think that's, I didn't say anything proprietary there. It's going to be a program that you can get a certification, and now you can work for these big companies that own the piping, and you can represent them. So you look at you know, uh, did they do the X-ray they're supposed to do? Did they do all the NDT testing, any of the heat treating that needed to be done? All the stuff the code says, you got to dig into the code to make sure make sure there's an ITP.
They're compliant.
And they're compliant, right?
Okay.
So it's kind of the same things that an AI would do on jurisdictional stuff, but it's going to be for the owner. So that's going to be another one coming up. So what AWS is doing is exciting, with all these endorsements that are coming out. And again, most of these you don't have to retake. It's all part of your, when you recertify or renew, it's all part of that, right? So there's no more money involved.
Okay.
So
now
with
the WPQ2, like I'm assuming that's open book.
Yeah. So
which code books or specs or which ones do they go off of?
B21 is the majority of it. There's I think D11 and B21
really
were and there's a little bit extra, but not much. And then all that stuff's online. So the books are available to you online. When I took it as a when I took it as a beta, you weren't allowed to bring the books, but now you are. And the really bad part when I took it as a beta is, they got the tables when you get to B21 and you have to turn it sideways to read all the material stuff. Well, their copy of Adobe didn't do that. So you had to look at it like this.
Turn your head sideways or flip the monitor on it.
They've got that fixed now. But yeah, and that was one of the big criticisms. And I wish they would allow you to
use the search
function.
You should be able to, because if you're going to reference a digital copy while you're doing the work.
That's how people do it. That's how people use it. And,
especially like I tried navigating ASME Section 9, and it's like, oh, that's in QW 87. It's like, oh, great. That's, 60 pages this way. You got to scroll. No, type it into the search bar. Boom, I'm on that page. Now I can track down the information I need. It's
right.
Nothing more than using the glossary in the back of the book.
It's just a
digital glossary.
Right. And that's how people use them. Back, again, I'm 56, I remember having to go to the back in the glossary and look up porosity. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'm looking for porosity for welder qualification. So I know it's going to be in clause 6, right? Back then it would have been in clause 4, but, so I know what clause I can eliminate the 2s, the 3s, the 6s, the 7s, right? But at the end of the day, it's the same thing, right? And if you use the search function, it's going to take you to 2 or 3 beforehand, because it always says, hey, when you do this, you got to look at this, right? And so you're going to hit several of those. But at the end of the day, I mean, they could even write the test questions using similar language, but not the same. So you'd have to understand how to look it up. But even today, like in 2015, they came out with shelf bars. And you still, if you look in the 2015 or 2020, and you put shelf bars, it won't take you there. It doesn't even recognize it as a word, right? But it's there and it's on the test. So it's just kind of weird stuff.
It's just never landed in the glossary yet.
Right.
So you
But
got
yeah,
to
I
know
would
whether
say,
you're looking at fabrication or performance qualification or
yeah,
and
that
that's
one.
what really helped me out is like because that's how I went through high school. Glossary, boom. Look if it's open book exam, go to the glossary, figure out where it's mentioned. Okay,
That's
I know
right.
we studied chapter 6 this week, so it's not going to be in 7, 8. Chapter 3. It's not going to be any of those. So it's the same thing when I was taking, like you were saying, when you take the CWI exam. That was my last ditch effort. If I couldn't find something, I'd go to the glossary. Find out, okay, I know we're talking about fabrication here, so that's going to be in clause 7. So anywhere that word's listed in clause 7, that's where I'm going to start going and
That's right.
process of elimination until I can find it.
That's right.
Yeah, I wasn't too sure about the WPQ2. I haven't poked around a whole lot on that, but like I said, I got the WPQ1. I'm really happy with that one. I don't know if I'm going to wait till my next 9-year recert and just recert with the WPQ2 because I don't necessarily need that right now. But I mean, that's probably another feather that I'm going to put in my cap at some point in time that I can actually
But you're
use.
pretty sharp. I mean, you're pretty sharp on that. And you've seen.
I don't know. I'm getting old, man.
Dude, you're one of the sharpest CWIs I know. And, I volunteer my time, and I'll make that to anybody out here too. So, anybody that's listening, I volunteer. My passion is to help young CWIs because, as you take the CWI test, you may only have that much experience in welding. And I say that, but you could be SMAW and GMAW, really not know a lot about TIG, GTAW. You might not know a lot about SAW. You certainly probably don't know a lot about explosion welding or railroad where they're doing a chemical process. So welding is a great big ocean, and you're a little tadpole once you get your CWI, and I see it all the time, right? And I make myself available, and it's amazing that I'll get calls 2 and 3 times a week from young CWIs, right? And just having the confidence, because I don't tell them the answer per se, I help guide them to where it's at, and I show them how I find the answer,
And that's the best
right?
way to do it.
Oh, for sure. And then it's, well, maybe once a week, and that's once a month. Now, when they call me, it's like 3 or 4 months apart, and it's something that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
But by gaining the confidence, to go out there, I have one guy out in California, and he's a rock star out there, right? Had another guy up in the Carolinas just recently, and he used to call me 2 or 3 times. And don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining by any means, but hey, this is how you do it. This is where you find it. And by explaining that, just that little bit of mentoring, and these guys become outstanding CWIs, right? And a lot of times, like I said, your company will throw you into it. You don't know anything about it, or you may get into it, and all of a sudden you're the new sheriff in town, and everybody's looking at you. The engineer's looking at you because you're supposed to be the subject matter expert. The welders are looking to you, when they're not talking behind your back about how they've welded since before you were born, and all that, and oh, you need to be a welder for 20 years before you become a CWI, and blah blah blah, and all that. They just butt hurt because they got their weld got rejected or something. And you got to do, you treat them with tact as well, because that's their thing, and I'll say this to everybody out there, the weld will be there forever. It might be covered in insulation or under paint, but the weld's there for a long, long time, right? And that's your signature. Well, your report as a CWI is there forever, and that's your signature, right? If you, I'll say this too, especially when it comes to procedures, absolutely, procedures and qualification / certification, right? Because it's you qualify means you met it, right? And then you certify it, you put it on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not certifying the paper per se because the paper didn't weld anything, right? and the paper didn't earn that range of qualification. And that's what's so important for CWIs, because you have to look in the book and say, hey, if he did this, what does he get, or she, right? So what does the welder get? What range of qualification? If they tested on half-inch plate under D11, how much qualification range do they get? Well, 1/8 to 1 inch, right? So knowing that, and that's what the average Joe doesn't know, right? So being a CWI, but I can't tell you how many CWIs sign where the manufacturer is supposed to sign. I can't tell you how many times that happens, right? And that's just not right. I mean, and there's a whole ethics thing. You go back to 2011 in the Expression Trends. There's a whole ethics article about that, just that. And everybody thinks that, hey, if you test in one position on one piece of plate, you're certified to weld everything, and that's certainly not true, right?
Right.
So,
And I
so
think that's
one
the
is
hardest part about filling out the WPQR half the time is range of qualification. You know, like D11, I've
for
got that
sure.
stuff memorized, but I hop into D13 and it's like, oh, okay, you get this gauge and to this gauge, but this one you only get this what you tested on. So you've got to make sure, especially going from one code to the next, you can't. It's not always half the thickness to twice the thickness, or
How,
eighth
how
inch
about
to
D14,
double
the
the
rebar
thickness.
code? Do you know how to?
I don't
You're an
even
iron
own that
worker.
book. I don't even no. They tried to get me to do rebar, and I asked them. I was like, they're like, hey, come on, we're gonna go out and bend some rods. And I was like, why would you want to bend welding rods? They're like, no, we're gonna go bend some rods. Come on, get in the truck. And I looked over there. There's a stack of rebar. And I was like, oh no, I'm
No.
sick. I gotta go. I think I've bent rods probably two to three jobs when I was out at Buena Vista. And I was like, man, I had enough of that. There's people that love that stuff. We had a guy that, I mean, that was his thing. He loved it. He didn't want to weld for nothing. But you throw him in the rebar patch, happy as a lark. I was like, that's
You
not
know,
me.
I thought I was a sharp guy, right? Until I realized I didn't know anything about doing tensile tests on rebar to plate or
Mhm.
rebar to rebar, right? And actually, it was pretty cool because when I was out in Phoenix, I saw it. They actually had the setup at the Ironworker Hall, but I had seen a picture of it, but to see it in real, and it's not like anything you're used to out of D11 or Section 9 or anything else. So, like I said, even somebody that's been around, I'm nearly 40 years into this, hadn't seen it till this year.
Yeah, that was Bill Comlos when he developed a welding procedure to weld these little uh, man-made powdered iron little veins. They're like 45 thousandths diameter, and he had to do testing. And he's like, this stuff's not in any code book. You know, this is going on the
Right.
Mars rover to collect water samples and stuff like that. And he's like, there's actually testing requirement in D14, which is the rebar code. So when people think of rebar, it's just like junk scrap material. But that's where he had to
Aerospace, baby.
that's where he had to pull the testing requirements to test something for the aerospace industry, and it worked
Nice.
right out of the rebar code. But yeah, I mean, it's working in all those different codes. I mean, you can spend correct me if I'm wrong, but you can spend your entire career in one code book.
Oh, for sure. It gets boring. I mean, you become a super expert in that
Well, yeah, you
one
become
thing.
really good at it. But I mean, if that's your industry, that's your niche, you can get really good with it. Like I've gotten really, really good with D11, and it
Yeah.
wasn't until I opened up, the accredited testing facility, they're like, oh no, we need to test in D1 too. Okay, well, I guess I'm gonna have to get proficient with that one. Well, we also need D13, and we need a little bit of D1 whatever. I got a guy coming in to do some D14.1 later on this week. Okay, that's heavy equipment. All right, okay, so
Yep.
I got to start digging. And luckily,
D14.3
I've yeah,
construction equipment.
luckily I've got a lot of these code books, so I don't have to go out and buy one in hopes that I'll ever need it. But it's worked out pretty well so far.
Well, not that I'm trying to steal your work, but most of the ATFs here are at schools,
Yep.
and it's pretty much limited to D11.
Yeah. Well, that's
Right.
because we've got the CAPE funding, and so they've
The
got
CAPE
hey,
funding.
I need 20 students to do a D11 test, just SMAW3G. And so, I mean, you can do a lot of work that way, but nobody's really
Yeah.
serving the companies. And a lot of these companies, they don't have an in-house CWI. And I think I spend half my time educating clients on what exactly they need because they call me up and have
That's
no idea. They're like, I need a
oh, I
D11
know.
cert. What are you doing? Aluminum stringers for a water fountain. Okay, well, first off, you don't. we're going to put D11 away. We're going to bust out a different code book. So we're
by the
looking
way,
at D12
doesn't have any pre-qualified, by the way.
Exactly. So now we got to develop a procedure, and they're like, "What? We can't just test a welder? No, you can't just slap two pieces of metal together, weld it out, and test it. That's not how any of this works." But so I try to educate them.
That's how I've been getting a lot of my work lately, especially when I, started making it known that, hey, I'm starting my own, consulting business. I get the ATFs that are at schools are like, hey, somebody wants to do aluminum. We don't do that. Can you help them out? So, and the rebar one, that's something too, so luckily if you've got a lot of experience in doing everything else, you can figure it out and get it done, but because you know how the codes work.
Yeah. A lot of the codes are very similar, but not the exact same. So you can't, and I never go off of prior knowledge.
Don't go off memory.
Even in D11, I don't go off memory. It's like, okay, I'm going to pull up table 6.1, table 5.8. I'm going to look at those, see what it says verbatim, especially when you start jumping around in other code books, because you get used to, filling in one box with a certain thing. And then all of a sudden, one essential variable changes, and that changes everything. So I always like to go back and just, I'll think about it and be like, here's what I think it is. And then I'll go double check myself in the code book. Okay, cool. I was right. Now on to the next one.
Yeah. And, the other part is you start learning stuff. And if you go to WPQ2, and you know it as well as I do, go to the essential variables. Like before you even do a procedure qual, a PQR, first thing I do is look, hey, is there a $276 SWPS that'll work for this? Because if you got to test it, my lab charges me $1,000 to do tensils and bends, and they're cheap, right? They're cheap, but we do a lot of work with them, so we get a pretty good rate. But so if you have to do a procedure qual, you're talking about a lot of money. Now, if you have to do them in multiple positions, that ain't cheap.
All right.
So first thing I do is, hey, can you use the SWPS? Is there a pre-qual option, right? And B21 would come in really handy because you only have to test in one position. You don't have to test in all four, right? And you get a big range of materials that you're going to be qualified on. So that's why I like the B21 or ASME, which is, again, B21's ASME light. But so when I'm looking at, I get a lot of companies come to me and they say, hey, can you do me a pre-qual for SMAW? And I've got where, I don't even put the amperage in there anymore. I just refuse to, right? So I'll put in there within manufacturer's recommendation, because under table 5.1, that's requirement.
Exactly what it says. Manufacturer's recommendation.
And then it says, hey, who's the trade name, right? Manufacturer and trade name. Well, that's not a requirement to be put on there. If you look in table 5.2 under essential variables, that's not a requirement. If you look under table 5.2, amps is a requirement for flux core, GTAW, but not SMAW. It's not a requirement. So I think we had this conversation a while ago, right?
A couple weeks ago. I was like, yeah, you know what? I went over there and grabbed my code book. I was like, he's right. I still list it because, like, I primarily use 2 to 3 different electrode manufacturers. So whatever the company, because I want to make it a little bit easier for the welder and say, here, stay within this range. Boom. There you go. So that was the one thing you said you were working. The funny thing, like, Andy rejected a cert. So the funny thing is, prior to, I think I wrote a WPS shortly after the code changed, and it became an essential variable to list the manufacturer and trade name. And I didn't on a WPS, and he rejected it. But the cool thing was, Andy saw it was, me who, signed off on it. And he's like, hey, man, fix this. I was, all right, yep, no problem. Done. Boom.
Right. And that's, Andy, I love Andy to death. He is outstanding.
He's a good dude.
He is a really good dude. And it helps, one of the things, I'll say this too. If you're not part of your local AWS section, you need to be a part of it, because, just like me, our relationship, your relationship with them, you can get a hell of a lot more done and cut through a lot of the red tape just because you know people, right?
Yep.
And by being in your local section, that goes a long way. So I really, really would encourage people to get involved in your local sections. So that's my pitch for that. But it's not because it's a money grab or anything like that. Nobody's making money at the section level.
No,
That's not a
I can
money grab
attest to
thing.
that. Andy's our treasurer. I can attest to that.
So that's not the money grab. I mean, you could say, hey, $1,000 for a CWI test, but when you see what all goes into it, and that's for 3 years, and you're a member for 3 years, there's a lot of stuff that uh, you can say that, and a lot of people gripe about it. But just being a member at your local section, it's $100 a year, for crying out loud, to
I
be
think
a
it's
member.
88. Initially, I think it's
Yeah,
$100, and then
I
12
think they're
bucks
going to
goes
go
to.
up.
I mean, yeah, it's a possibility.
Being on the board of directors, you can see. I think they're pushing to raise it just a couple of dollars. It's
But
not even
it's
much.
still not much. I mean, you look at you weren't
No,
there. So when Matt came down to the last section meeting, we had Robert's Oxygen donated. I think it's like a $600 oxy fuel kit. So I mean, you pay
nice,
$100, you get a chance to win a oxy fuel kit. I mean, that was the
right?
whole setup, and then somebody else got like $150 worth of drill bits. So we give away some great prizes at the
Oh
section
yeah,
meetings. Plus the technical demonstrations, the information, the networking is huge. Um,
absolutely.
Linking up with everybody. I mean, the friendships and relationships you develop at those things. I mean, hell, that's why I decided we needed one here in Central Florida. Like, I enjoyed going to the meetings so much, but I couldn't always make them, the drive to Ocala. Like, well, if I can't make it up there, I'm sure there's a lot of other people. So let's start one here. So, I mean, I
And
enjoyed going to the section meetings so much, we started our own section.
the funny part is that you are closer to the Florida West Coast than you were at Ocala, because you're an
Yeah.
hour from me.
Right. But
Right.
at the time I was I was teaching in Sanford. So I think
Right.
those students were closer to Sanford.
Gotcha. And that's one of the things we're trying to work out now. Like I'm kind of trying to push, um, uh, well, what I have a name for it and I can't even think of it, but having, like junior sections, right? Because
Oh, like
Fort
a satellite
Myers is,
section?
yeah. So I called it something else, but satellite works. Getting guys involved down there, and right now, Griffin Sturkey, who's my Columbia, South Carolina guy, we're trying to get Charleston started back up, and I've got a guy there, Andrew Dock, that's really um, pushing to get now. He's going through an ATF audit, so
Give him some
so
time.
kind of backburnered, right? Right. So, but trying to get that section back up. But there's the Aiken area. There's other places. So we look at the hotspot maps of where our guys are, and we're not servicing them well, right? So, um, so we're looking at doing little breakout sections down there, and having more than one section, having satellite sections.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea, especially for like Georgia, because they've got one section in Georgia and it's Atlanta, and
Yeah,
Atlanta's 8 hours away from Atlanta. So, I mean, just
yeah.
having like little other sections set up to where you could service that population where they're not traveling so far, you get better turnouts.
So Rob Trudell, who is their current chairman, is really toying with having the south of Atlanta section, and then a north of Atlanta section, where the bulk of those, because most of them live on the north side. But Rob's still pretty close to Atlanta. But you start looking like Macon and Savannah, and there's other parts of the state that, it's a 3 or 4 hour drive to get to anywhere.
Hmm.
Right. Um, so like looking at satellites, they are successful at having student chapters.
Yeah.
But Rob really does a lot of the homework and the groundwork, and he stays involved with them. But one of the things that we see all the time is that student sections don't thrive, or you get an instructor that's really, really engrossed, and then it'll be active for 3 or 4 years, and then the instructor moves on, and nobody wants
Then it
a
disbands.
headache.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they don't disband; they just kind of sit dormant.
Okay.
So we should, as a director, we should close them. Uh, we should be more diligent about that, but we're not. So we have a lot of, I want to say, not as active sections, chapters, as we should. But I do like you guys in Columbia, basically they're based out of schools, but they're full blown sections. And I really love the idea where your students get to hang out and meet and rub elbows with the movers and shakers, right? And you guys, and certainly Columbia does the same thing, do fantastic job of having, you had Chuck Fott, you've had your line boring thing was awesome, man.
Yeah, with
That was
Eric
super cool.
Esslinger. Then we just
Yeah.
had Mark Wilson with Rockmount out. He did another good demonstration. I
Yeah.
like
And like I
those
said,
because it's more it's hands on, and because a lot of the demographic of the members that are showing up are students. I want
yep,
them to like come up here, put your hands on this, try this out. This might be something you're not familiar with because your school doesn't have the resources to teach this, or it's not in your curriculum. So check this out. This is stuff that takes place in the industry. These are other tools and equipment that you might not see right now, but once you get in industry, you'll be a little bit more familiar with it, or different. Just put more tools in your toolboxes, essentially.
sure. And, it draws a large crowd and a lot of people that wouldn't normally come, you know, and, yeah, you guys do an outstanding job, but doing it from a school, like I call it the hybrid model. Um, and Daryl Gassler's like in love with that too, because we do get a lot of participation. So,
Yeah, it helps quite a
but
bit.
yeah, wrapping it back up, trying to come back. I know I'm terrible about running off on
Oh,
spurs,
you're
and I
good.
apologize
I
for
get
that.
the same thing, man. Squirrel.
Yeah, ADHD, right?
Yep.
But certs, get the certs that make sense for your job, right? Or what your passion is. If you want to get into, hey, how many times have you heard young CWI say, "Hey, nobody will hire me because I don't have experience"?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
All the time. I mean, it's that is like the key thing. Nobody, the job market is dried up. Well, the job market is not dried up. There is a ton of need for good quality CWIs out there, right? But you really need to have knowledge about non-destructive testing. You need to have knowledge about heat treating. You need to have knowledge about just general inspection. And I mean, most of the CWIs that I know that aren't teaching um, are in quality departments, and inspections like 10% of their total gig, right? Because we're doing inspection and test plans. We're reading the contracts to see what inspections need to be done, right? We're doing all that OI kind of stuff, right? The owner's inspector. Um, we're preparing NDT plans, right? You don't have to be an NDT expert, but you need to know about it. Um, do you need to know how to read film? Um, doesn't hurt for sure, right?
Mhm.
But you need to know how to read a film interpretation report. Um, and you can rely on, if you have questions, your NDT folks should be able to help you out, and that's why they have level 3s to come in and help you out over if you have any issues with the level 2s. But there's a lot of other things that you need to learn, right? Um, Certainly welder qualification. So you're not, as a level 2, if you look at B51, I don't think that you have to be an expert at qualifying welders, but you need to be able to look at the welder
You
qualification
need to be familiar with
certification,
it.
be familiar with it, and see if it's wrong, right? And the same with the PQR and WPS. Hey, is it, and even if you look at Part B, that's a lot of Part B, right? Is to say, hey, what's wrong with this, right? Because it'll be wrong. Now, for me, I do it all the time. I see stuff right off the bat, but um, to show, to have the credentials, let's see, WPQ1, WPQ2, SCWI. I guess actually they're over here. Um, have the credentials, right, to show that you know what you're talking about. And there's like you said, you have to crack the code all the time. You always have to crack the code. I mean, I'm gonna ask you a question, and this isn't to make you sound stupid, but
Uh-oh.
if you're what's the atmospheric exposure limit for 7018?
8 hours. Well, according to D11, I think it's 4 hours, but according to the manufacturer's specifications, 8 to 10 hours, depending on which electrodes you get, whether it's
So
H4R,
you're it's
H16R.
yeah. So the R or M is moisture resistant,
Hmm.
right? So it's 4 hours, which I learned, and I've
I
almost
remember that.
stubbed
Remember
my
that
toe.
story.
So and then
Check
it's
their QA
9 hours.
manual.
That's right. It's 9 hours, which again, it's in the code, right? How long can an 8018 stay out?
That I don't. I'd have to grab my code book.
2 hours. 9018.
1 hour?
1 hour.
Oh, I'm catching on quick.
100. 118.
5 minutes.
Half hour.
Really?
Oh yeah, go look it up. Go look it up. So I was recently, somebody asked me, I guess I stuck my nose into, somebody had asked a question about the preheat chart. So AWS has the AWS material for studying for Part B.
Mm-hmm.
There's a 9 chrome procedure in there, and there's a heat chart in the book of exhibits, right? And so one of the things you notice on the heat chart, they didn't do the bakeout, the hydrogen bakeout. They didn't take it up. So they got to drop it down to under 200. 175 is pretty normal. Take it up, hold it at 600 for an hour, drop it back down, and then take it to 13, between, I want to say 1375 to 1425. But that's critical. And you have to drop it back down. It's 9 chrome is just funny that way. You have to follow those rules, right? Or you won't, you're going to get it. Your hardness won't be right. It's the reason it would crack would be from hydrogen, but in order to get the right hardness and the right temper and all that, temper is probably not the right word, but to get the right heat profile on that thing, you got to drop it down, and it's got to start under 200 before you take it up. It just has to, because you're welding it at 400. You got to drop it down to 175, take it up to 600 according to that procedure for the bakeout. In reality, Duke Energy and FP&L have it. Hey, if they don't approve your hydrogen, if they don't approve your rod control procedures, right? And my dumbass, and even in my later career, not too long ago, hey, we keep our rods at 250 degrees. We can have them out for 4 hours or 9 hours if they're MR, but we're using 100K rods. So half hour is the limit. You hand the guy 5 rods at a time. So you were pretty close. 5
Mm-hmm.
rods at a time, because that's about the time that you'll burn them up, right? So, but they have to be returned to the oven. And, you have a whole sign out. Hey, I signed out 15 rods at noon, and at noon 30, I got 3 back, and I issued 15 more, right? So you have to have a rod control program. And even some smart guys, at big companies I don't think realized, what the code actually says. And I'm applying AWS to ASME, so it might not be great, but best practices would be, hey, 30 minutes. So they do that bakeout because, as you know, hydrogen, especially in 9 chromes, you get up in the 514 steels, and you got 48 hours. You can't even inspect them, right? So we all know that from CWI school. So it's one of those things that every time I read something, I learn something more, right? So you just keep building on what you know.
Yeah.
I will tell you this. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's a constant state of improvement. Every day I'm learning something.
Every day. And I will tell you this. So I was in Miami last week, and went to their leadership symposium, which was fantastic. And that's one of those things. If you have any desire to be on the executive boards at your sections, that leadership thing was fantastic. You went to that, right?
Yeah, I went in 2017.
Yeah, no, that thing is just fantastic. And then while I was down there, the education department was like, "Hey, if you got any suggestions," I said, "Well, I got a big suggestion on your old WIT textbook. There's a whole paragraph I don't like, and it deals with how they phrase certification versus verification."
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to be in direct opposition to everything else out there. So, I kind of sent them that in my article, and said, "Hey, I wish we would relook at this, because that's causing a lot of people to, when they learn that, they just absolutely guarantee that they're going to get it wrong."
Well, I think in AWS A 3.0, they've
Mhm.
actually added certification and qualification into the standard terms and definitions. So now
Yeah.
it's
So
like explicitly written.
in D11, D11 calls it written certification, where in A 3.0 it's written verification, and in clause 619, the only other place written verification shows up is in clause 619 of D11, and it's a carryover because it's always said, well, it hasn't always said, but for the last 3 or 4 codes, it said written verification. And I have a sneak peek at the 2025, and so in 2020, the definition in D11 in clause 3 says written certification, and now it's went from clause 619 to 620. The clause 620 now says written certification, so it the matches the how they altered the meaning, right? So because if it shows up in clause 3, they're using it differently than A30.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the whole reason they have it in there. So it more closely matches.
That's good.
But at the end of the day, I just don't know why they just don't say, "Hey, the WPQR is welder certification." They would just nip everything in the bud instead of making you have to do gymnastics to get there.
And that I got to explain that to clients too. Is like, here, I'm going to send you a WPQR, and they're like, "What's that?" And I was like, "That's the welder certification. That's the record
Right.
of the welder getting tested, and here's all the the range of qualifications that he or she gets for the test that they did, whether it's position, material thickness, material type, all that all the essential variables." That
Right, and that's exactly it. It's not, the paper didn't weld it, and it's you're certifying that what that welder did, and then you're certifying, hey, based on the code, this is what he gets.
Yep.
This is what the welder gets. This is the range, and that's unique to the welder. It's not unique to the paper.
Right.
It's unique to the welder. So, and I don't know why that's such a big thing, but for whatever reason, we got so many black spots in our profession, and so many people think the paradigms are so hard to get straight, and
that's why I don't go off of, I don't say anything about the code book unless I got it in front of me, because I don't want to rely off prior knowledge, because it's a lot of things in this industry. Well, that's the way I was taught, and whoever taught them was taught wrong or misunderstood it. So that's why I always like to trust but verify.
It doesn't help that when the main text that teaches CWIs is slanting it wrong.
Yeah, I think that's what Walt Spurko said. I think it's nullus in verba.
Yeah.
Trust
I love Walt too.
Yeah. I think that's what it is. I've got it saved on my phone. I looked at it every once in a while. I think that's the quote. But yeah.
Yep.
Daryl, I appreciate you hopping on here and taking the time out of your day to talk about all the different endorsements and certifications that are available for AWS, whether currently available or upcoming. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. If I don't see you before FabTech, I will definitely see you at FabTech.
Certainly. And I think we got Arcs and Ales to go hang out at.
Yes, sir. That's going to be a good time as well.
It's going to be a great time. But yeah, always love talking to you. And I'm honored to have you as a personal friend. So
likewise.
Thank you.
I appreciate you answering the phone when I call with all my silly questions.
They're not silly. And that's the thing. I don't think anybody's as silly, because, I find stuff that I thought I knew, and when I learn it different, it is what it is. Right. So, at the end of the day, let's all try to get on the same page and make sure that we're doing it as close to the code as we can.
100%. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in to this month's episode of Weld Wednesdays with AWS, brought to you by the American Welding Society. For more information on how you can get involved with AWS, just head on over to the website, aws.org. I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Stay safe out there, and until next time, make every weld better than your last.